Hey guys, welcome to Chinese Stories. Tonight, we're going way, way back. I'm talking bones, fire, and ancient mysteries. Imagine this. It's nighttime, 3,000 years ago. You're holding a turtle shell. You heat a metal rod until it's red hot, press it to the shell, and watch the cracks form. You stare at those lines, waiting for answers from the gods. That, my friend, is where Chinese writing was born. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me what city you're in and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. A long time ago, in ancient China, people believed everything had meaning: storms, sickness, crops, even dreams. But how did they ask the heavens for advice? They used bones. Well, bones and shells. These were called oracle bones. They came from ox shoulders and turtle plastrons, the flat part of a turtle's shell. But they weren't just bones, they were divine message boards. Here's how it worked. A king or priest would carve a question into the bone, like, will there be rain next week? Then they'd heat the bone until it cracked. The crack patterns were seen as the god's answer. Later, they'd carve that answer right next to the question. Simple, but genius. Now here's the wild part. Those carved symbols weren't just marks. They were the ancestors of Chinese characters. Actual words. Some of them you could still recognize today. Huo meant fire. Ru meant Sunday you. Looking at the baby photos of modern Chinese writing. Back then, writing was for the powerful. Kings, shamans, royal scribes. If you could write, you had status, but it wasn't about novels or poetry yet. These characters had one job: connect humans with the divine. They were magical tools. And because they were carved on bones, they lasted. Thousands of pieces have been dug up. Archaeologists found over 150,000 oracle bones. And when they finally cracked the code in the 20th century, boom, the history books had to be rewritten. Suddenly, China's written history didn't start in 500 BC. It jumped back almost 1,000 more years. That's like finding out your family tree goes back to the dinosaurs. But let's not miss the point. These bone scratches weren't just for record keeping. They were belief, power, and communication all rolled into one. Imagine writing something today on your phone and someone digging it up in 5,000 years and saying, wow, this emoji was their version of a prayer. That's the level of legacy we're talking about. Also, the characters weren't random drawings. They were pictographs. A horse looked like a horse. A mountain looked like a mountain. Over time, they got more abstract. But that visual DNA still runs through Chinese writing today. That's why it feels alive, because it is. And here's a fun twist. Some bones had corrections, like the diviner made a mistake or the outcome was different than expected. It's the world's oldest oops. Even 3,000 years ago, people were second-guessing themselves. So, next time you see a Chinese character, remember it might be the great-great-great-grandchild of a question carved into a turtle shell under moonlight. A moment frozen in time, asking something like, will my harvest fail? Or should I go to war? And here we are, still reading it, still listening. So, let's move forward a few centuries. Oracle bones were fading out, but writing? It was just getting started. What began as questions to the gods slowly turned into tools for everyday life. From divine whispers to shopping lists, Chinese characters made the jump from magic to management. At first, only kings and priests used writing. But once the system proved useful, guess what? Everyone wanted in. Governments realized they could use it for records, taxes, laws, Farmers use it to count grain. Merchants use it to track goods. Writing stopped being sacred, it became useful. Very, very useful. Characters had to adapt. They couldn't stay as complex as oracle bone symbols forever. Enter bronze inscriptions. These were characters carved onto bronze vessels. Ritual stuff, sure, but cleaner, more structured. Writing was evolving. The strokes got smoother, the shapes more organized. You can tell they were thinking, we need to make this easier to read. And then, something even bigger happened. Clerks. Regular people whose job was to write. Not priests, not kings, just dudes with brushes. Imagine someone in ancient China saying, "Yeah, I'm in admin." That was real. A writing system that once spoke only to the heavens was now helping track pig deliveries. There's something kind of beautiful about that. A system born in spiritual fire finding its way into dusty ledgers and daily chores. It's the start of bureaucracy. And the Chinese characters were perfect for it, compact, flexible, and rich with meaning. The characters also began to multiply. A lot. Different regions, different dynasties, everyone had their tweaks. Some wrote it one way, others another. Dialects influenced writing. And without a central system, it got messy fast. It's like if every state in the US had its own spelling of banana. Imagine trying to run a country like that. But here's the thing. The characters didn't break. They stretched. New words were built using old ones. Simple ideas combined into complex meanings. The system grew like a tree, branching in all directions but always rooted in the same soil. That's one of the coolest things about Chinese writing. It's flexible but unshakable. And as society evolved, writing kept pace. Schools appeared. Kids learned characters on bamboo strips. Ink, brushes, silk scrolls, it was all part of the new writing culture. And with writing came a new kind of power. Knowledge. If you could read and write, you had a key, others didn't. That key opened doors to jobs, politics, and respect. But don't get it twisted, writing wasn't easy. One character might have 15 strokes. Some people studied for years just to master a few hundred. But they did it because being literate in ancient China wasn't just about information, it was status, it was identity. You weren't just learning how to write, you were learning how to be. So from fortune-telling bones to balance sheets and birth records, writing in China made a huge leap. It left the temples and entered the streets. It traded magic for meaning. And once it did, there was no going back. Now let's talk about one of the boldest, most dramatic plot twists in the history of Chinese writing, when one man with one empire hit the reset button on thousands of characters. His name? Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. And he didn't do anything halfway. Before him, China wasn't really China. It was a bunch of warring states. Each had its own way of writing. Same words, different styles. Imagine if every US state had its own alphabet. Chaos, right? Qin Shi Huang saw that and said, no more. So after unifying the country through war and sheer willpower, he decided to unify the writing too. His team created a standardized script called Xiaozhuan, or small seal script. It was clean, consistent, and officially approved. Suddenly, everyone from tax collectors to court scribes had to use the same shapes, the same strokes. That meant smoother communication across the empire. And most importantly, it meant control. Because let's be real, this wasn't just about making reading easier. It was about ruling better. You can't govern a huge land if people can't read your orders. By locking in one script, the emperor didn't just unify writing, he unified thought. If everyone used the same words, they'd eventually think the same way. At least, that was the idea. And here's where it gets juicy. He also ordered a massive purge of old texts, burned books, buried scholars. If it didn't align with his rule, it had to go. Harsh? Totally. But effective? Also, yes. What emerged was a cleaner, more uniform writing system that would shape Chinese culture for centuries. But the writing didn't stop there. After Qin Shi Huang died, dynasties rose and fell, and so did writing styles. The most famous evolution was Lishu, or clerical script. It was flatter, faster, and easier to write with a brush, perfect for bureaucrats buried under paperwork. You can thank overworked Han Dynasty clerks for making Chinese characters more practical. Lishu was a big turning point. The shapes got wider. The brush strokes got more expressive. That's when writing stopped looking carved and started looking written. It became more human, more emotional, and it opened the door to calligraphy, which we'll get to soon. But back to the emperor, what he started never really ended. That idea of standardizing characters stuck. Every major dynasty after him tried to refine the system. Each added a layer, but they all kept the bones he built. So think about it. One man, over 2,000 years ago, made a call that still affects how Chinese is written today. His characters are in school books, menus, and TikTok subtitles. All because he believed one language, one empire, one writing system could hold everything together. That's not just history. That's a power move. Now the empire was set, the script was set, and a new kind of hero entered the scene. Not a warrior, not a king, but a scholar. From the Han Dynasty onward, if you were smart, ambitious, and had decent handwriting, you didn't need a sword, you needed a brush. Because in China, writing became the key to power. This was the era of the civil service exam. Want to work for the government, you had to pass tests, hard tests, like memorize classical books and write poetry, kind of hard. And everything had to be written perfectly. One sloppy stroke, you're out. So kids studied for years, hoping their characters could launch a career. Talk about pressure. And this is where calligraphy became king. Sure, it was art, but it was also survival. Good calligraphy showed discipline, knowledge, and style. Bad calligraphy, it made you look uneducated, careless, even untrustworthy. Imagine if your job interview today included a handwriting contest using a paintbrush. That was real life for generations. Now picture this. A young scholar in a tiny village, hunched over bamboo scrolls, brush in hand, copying the classics over and over again. His fingers ache. His ink runs out. He keeps going. Because if he gets it right, just right, he could leave the village forever and work in the capital. That's how powerful writing had become. At the same time, styles were exploding. There wasn't just one right way to write anymore. There was keishu, regular script, precise, balanced, like printed text. There was caoshu, cursive, wild, fast, like dancing ink, and xingshu, running script, a beautiful middle ground. Each style had a vibe. Scholars choose what matched their mood, their message, their moment. Some became legends, like Wang Xizhi, the sage of calligraphy. People copied his work for centuries. Even emperors admired him. One famous story says a Tang emperor loved his calligraphy so much, he had it buried with him. That's some next-level fan behavior. But it wasn't just about looks. Calligraphy reflected the writer's soul. Were they calm or angry, proud or humble? The brush told the truth. Every stroke had rhythm. Every dot had weight. It was like writing music on paper. No delete button, no spell check. Just ink, skill, and heart. And here's the cool part. These weren't just personal diaries. They were letters, essays, official documents. The government ran on brush and ink. Policies, taxes, promotions, they all flowed through calligraphy. It was the software of the empire. Elegant, silent, unstoppable. Even today, Chinese calligraphy is a respected art. Museums show it off. Artists still practice it. But back then, it was everywhere. In classrooms, on walls, on scrolls. It shaped how people thought, how they felt, how they moved through the world. So in this chapter of writing's evolution, the pen really was mightier than the sword, or more accurately, the brush was mightier than everything. And if you knew how to use it, your words could open doors, move hearts, and write your destiny stroke by stroke. Alright? Now let's bring in two inventions that completely supercharged Chinese writing, paper and printing. Before paper, people were writing on bones, bamboo, silk stuff that was either super heavy or super expensive. Imagine trying to write a novel on strips of bamboo. That was real. But then, along came paper. Legend says, a man named Cailan during the Han Dynasty came up with a new recipe. He used tree bark, old rags, and fishing nets to create something light, cheap, and smooth. Boom, paper was born. Suddenly, writing was easier to carry, to copy, to store. You didn't need to be rich or royal anymore. You just needed ink and paper. And then came the real game changer, printing. Not just copying by hand, but pressing characters onto paper again and again. The earliest Chinese printing used wood blocks. A craftsman carved an entire page into a wooden slab, brushed on ink, and stamped it onto paper. Labor-intensive? Yes. But once the block was carved, you could make 100 copies in a day. That's how knowledge started spreading like wildfire. Books, calendars, Buddhist scriptures all printed and shared. No more waiting months for a handwritten scroll. If woodblock printing was version 1, then a guy named Bishan took it to the next level. In the Song Dynasty, he invented movable type. Instead of carving a whole page, he made individual character blocks out of clay. He could mix, match, and rearrange them for any page. It was like building sentences with stamps. Genius, right? Well, almost. Movable type worked great in theory. But in practice, Chinese had a lot of characters. Thousands. Keeping all those blocks organized was like running a library made of Lego. Still, Bishan deserves credit for trying to solve a massive problem no one else dared touch. Printing didn't just spread books, it changed how people thought. Literacy rates grew. Students had access to more texts. Scholars debated ideas through print. Even the government used printing to distribute laws and announcements. Words were no longer locked in the hands of the elite. They were flowing into the streets. Also, printing gave birth to something new, publishing. And with publishing came editing, proofreading, and even plagiarism. Yes, the ancient version of copy-paste drama was alive and well. Writers complained about stolen poems, fake editions, and cheap knockoffs. Sound familiar? There were even book markets, rows of stalls selling printed texts. You could grab a romance novel, a Confucian classic, or a medical guide. The written word had become a product, an industry, a force. But let's not forget, behind every printed page was still the Chinese character. It had to be carved, cast, or stamped. Even with new tools, the writing system stayed central. Each character had to be precise, balanced, and readable. If not, the whole page fell apart. So, with paper and printing, Chinese writing didn't just survive, it expanded, it traveled. It found its way into homes, hearts, and history books. It proved that even in a world before electricity, information could still go viral. By the time the 20th century rolled in, Chinese characters had seen empires rise and fall, survive dynasties, wars, and revolutions. But now, they were facing their biggest identity crisis yet. Were they too complicated to survive in the modern world? Let's be honest, Chinese characters are beautiful, but they're also complex. Some have 20, even 30 strokes, and that's just one word. Learning to read and write fluently takes years. So when China began pushing for modernization, people started asking tough questions. Should we simplify the writing system? Or should we get rid of it completely? That's right, some thinkers actually suggested ditching Chinese characters altogether and switching to the Roman alphabet, like A, B, C. They argued it would make learning easier, printing faster, and education more accessible. After all, Japan had adopted a hybrid system. Why couldn't China do the same? The debate got heated. On one side, traditionalists said, these characters are our history, our identity. You can't just throw them away. On the other side, reformers said, if we want to catch up with the modern world, we need to simplify. So the government compromised. Instead of replacing characters, they created 简化字, simplified Chinese. They reduced stroke counts, merged rare words, and tried to streamline the system. For example, the traditional character for dragon, long, became lone. Way easier to write, right? Simplified Chinese rolled out officially in the 1950 seconds, mostly in mainland China. It became the new standard for schools, books, and signs. Meanwhile, places like Taiwan, Hong Kong, and overseas Chinese communities stuck with traditional Chinese. And just like that, one language, two writing systems. But the reform didn't stop there. Pinyin was introduced too, a system that uses the Roman alphabet to show how Chinese words sound. It wasn't meant to replace characters, but to help people pronounce them. Still, it changed everything. Suddenly, Chinese could be typed on a regular keyboard, a revolution in disguise. Of course, the transition wasn't smooth. Some people resisted. Others struggled to switch. Old texts had to be reprinted. Teachers had to relearn their lessons. But overall, simplification made the learning to read and write more accessible, especially for millions of children in rural areas. Yet, even after simplification, the characters remained rich, poetic, and powerful. They still carried layers of meaning. One symbol could be a word, an idea, a story. That's what made them so resilient. They weren't just lines, they were living memories. And here's the twist. Even today, the debate isn't really over. Some people feel simplified Chinese lost a bit of the soul. Others say it was necessary for progress. But either way, both systems coexist. They're like twins who grew up in different cities, same roots, different vibes. So this chapter wasn't just about changing shapes. It was about redefining identity. In a century of fast change, China found a way to move forward without fully letting go of the past. The characters bent, but they didn't break. By now, Chinese characters had conquered paper, printing, and politics. But then came a new challenge: computers. Typing Chinese on a machine? That was a whole different beast. Unlike English, which has just 26 letters, Chinese has thousands of characters. How do you fit that into a keyboard? Early on, it was chaos. Engineers, inventors, and language nerds all tried to solve the same riddle. How do you input a 5,000-year-old writing system into a 20th century machine? The first Chinese typewriters were insane. Literally, they had trees filled with thousands of metal characters. Imagine hunting through drawers just to find the right ni or hao. Typing a letter took forever and a lot of patience. Some companies tried creative solutions. One machine had a spinning disk with hundreds of characters arranged by frequency. You moved the stylus, clicked the character, and hoped you didn't mess up. It was like playing a pinball game in ancient script. Then came input methods based on shapes. The most famous was Wu Bi. Instead of spelling words phonetically, it broke each character into parts and matched them to keys. Efficient, but it had a steep learning curve. Great for fast typists, terrifying for beginners. And then, like a breeze through the digital bamboo forest, came Pinyin input. Suddenly, all you had to do was type how the word sounded using Roman letters, and the system would give you a list of matching characters to choose from. You type ni hao, and up pops ni hao. Simple. Game-changing. Pinyin input was a turning point. It made Chinese finally click with the digital world. No more custom keyboards, no more hardware hacks. Just a regular QWERTY setup, a little software magic, and boom, Chinese typing for the masses. But even that had its quirks. With so many homophones in Chinese, the software had to guess what you meant. Type xi, and you might get shi, 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 or dozens of others. So predictive text and context became critical. Your computer wasn't just matching sounds, it was learning how you think. Then mobile phones came, and things got even wilder. Early phones with number pads used T9 input. People got insanely fast at texting with just their thumbs. Then smartphones arrived with touchscreen keyboards, handwriting recognition, voice input. Chinese characters were suddenly more mobile than ever. But let's pause here and appreciate something. Chinese didn't need to become an alphabet to survive the digital age. It didn't need to shrink itself to fit a machine. Instead, the machines adapted. Software, coding, engineering, all bent around the language. That says something powerful. Typing in Chinese today is smooth, fast, and intuitive. But behind every character you tap is 100 years of invention, trial, and error. A tug of war between tradition and tech. And yet, somehow, it works. So the next time you send a Chinese text or post a comment, remember you're carrying a script carved on turtle shells into a touchscreen world. That's not just progress, that's poetry. Now that Chinese could be typed, it faced a new challenge being seen. Across the internet, on phones, in emails, in code, how do you make sure that every Chinese character shows up correctly without turning into a blank square or a question mark? That's where Unicode comes in. The hero of this chapter isn't a person, it's a global code system. Before Unicode, the digital world was a mess of competing encoding systems. One software used this set of codes, another used that. A character that looked perfect in China might show up as gibberish in Europe. It was like sending a letter in English and the reader receiving it in Martian. Not ideal. Unicode fixed that. It created one master list of characters used by every language. Each symbol, whether it's a letter, emoji, or Chinese character, got its own unique number. No more mix-ups. No more lost meaning. Just one system to rule them all. For Chinese, this was massive. Unicode assigned codes for over 70,000 Chinese characters, and it's still expanding. That means everything from ancient calligraphy to modern slang can now live peacefully on your screen. Old characters from scrolls included. Rare dialect words covered, even classical forms. Yep, they're in there too. Suddenly, Chinese was no longer trapped in paper or pixels. It could move across borders, between devices, through software. You could send a message from Beijing to Boston, and the recipient would see exactly what you meant. That's not just convenience, that's cultural survival. Unicode also gave Chinese characters a kind of passport. Apps, websites, operating systems, all of them could now understand Chinese. They could read it, store it, display it, even sing it in karaoke. And it wasn't just Mandarin. Unicode covered characters used in Cantonese, Hokkien, even Korean Hanja, and Japanese kanji. A whole family of scripts unified by code. It also opened the door to multilingual creativity. Artists, poets, and designers could mix languages in one file. A sentence in English, a quote in Chinese, a date in Arabic, all in one message, perfectly aligned. That kind of fusion was unthinkable a few decades ago. And let's not forget this helped preserve the language too. Old dictionaries, ancient texts, rare manuscripts, they could all be digitized and archived. Future generations could access them with a click. Unicode didn't just carry writing forward, it brought the past with it. Today, Unicode runs silently in the background of your digital life. You don't see it. But every time a Chinese character pops up in a tweet, a file name, a video subtitle that's Unicode at work, invisible but essential. So yeah, Chinese characters started on bones, but now they live in the cloud. They travel across continents in milliseconds, and they stay exactly the same. That's the power of a system built to respect their depth, beauty, and complexity. It's funny, isn't it? The same characters once used to ask the gods for rain are now used to post food reviews, stream shows, write code. And thanks to Unicode, they'll keep evolving without ever disappearing. So here we are, 3,000 years after someone carved a question into a turtle shell under the stars. The tools have changed, the world has changed, but the characters, they're still here. Which leads to one simple question. Why? Why didn't China switch to the alphabet? Why didn't Chinese characters fade away like so many other ancient scripts? Why do billions of people still read, write, and love these complex, stroke-heavy symbols? The answer is deeper than language. It's about culture, identity, and the power of visual meaning. Chinese characters aren't just a writing system, they're a worldview. Every character carries layers. Take the word an. It means peace. But if you break it down, it's a woman you under a roof, a quiet home, a safe place. That's not just a word, that's a story, that's philosophy, in two parts. This kind of depth is everywhere. Hou means good. It's a woman and a child. Xin means trust. It's a person and words. These aren't random symbols. They're logic puzzles, visual metaphors, cultural codes. Reading Chinese isn't just decoding sound, it's seeing meaning. And for millions, these characters are home. They carry memories of handwritten letters, school exams, street signs, poems, family names. They link people to their history, their ancestors, their future. To give them up would be like erasing part of yourself. Even in modern times, when speed and simplicity rule, characters still thrive. People decorate homes with calligraphy. Kids learn to write with big, careful strokes. Designers use traditional scripts in logos and fashion. Tattoo artists ink poems and proverbs on skin. These aren't old relics, they're living tools. And here's something else: Chinese characters invite connection. Even when you don't know the full language, you can often guess a word's meaning by its shape. You see the fire radical and think, okay, this has something to do with heat. It's a bit like learning to read someone's face you pick up, meaning even without full understanding. That visual logic makes the language sticky. It stays with you, and it keeps pulling people in. All over the world, students learn Chinese not just for business or travel, but because the characters feel alive, mysterious, beautiful. So yes, Chinese characters are ancient. Yes, they take effort, but they're also modern, flexible, and still growing. Emoji, memes, new slang. Chinese absorbs it all. It evolves, but never erases. And maybe that's the magic. It's not just about how Chinese characters survived, it's about why they did. Because they're not just tools. They're bridges between past and present, between mind and heart, between people and meaning. So next time you see a Chinese character, pause. Look a little closer. Behind those strokes is a story. Behind that story is a civilization. And behind that civilization is a turtle shell cracked under firelight, whispering a question into the dark. And now, as we close the book on this 3,000-year journey, take a moment to just breathe. You've traveled from firelit bones to glowing phone screens, from ancient rituals to global code, all through the quiet strength of strokes and symbols that never stopped evolving. Let it all settle in, not as facts or dates, but as feeling. The feeling of wonder, that something so old can still feel so fresh. The feeling of connection across time, culture, and language. The feeling that maybe, in some small way, we're all carrying a little piece of those first carved characters whenever we write, speak, or just mean something deeply. So wherever you are right now, lights low, eyes heavy, maybe a little more curious than before. I hope this story stayed with you, not just in your mind, but in your breath, your stillness, your dreams. You don't need to remember every dynasty, every script. Just remember this: language is more than words. It's memory made visible. And Chinese characters, they're living proof that a meaning, when written with heart, never fades. Sleep well, traveler of time, and may your dreams tonight be written in strokes of light.